Okay, so we're about 3 minutes past the hour. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm sure some other people will join as we go along. But like I said, welcome to today's session on building ratings, rating systems and certification. We have a wonderful panel of very talented women here today to talk about the different rating systems and some other considerations when choosing the right certification system for your project. I'm Christina Tomaselli with Schneider Electric. We have Katrina Morgan from O'Brien and Associates. We have Alissa Feucht from Glumac, Elyse Hobson from UL, and Melanie Danuser from the Smart Building Center. We'll go ahead and start with introductions. I'll start with my introduction first. As I said, I'm Christina Tomaselli. I'm a consultant solution architect with Schneider Electric in our digital buildings group. And I work closely with our consultant engineering community to assist in the design and creation of documentation of the overall technology strategy to a specific building automation system solution to meet their customers' goals around sustainability, efficiency, resiliency, and people centricity. I have over 16 years of experience in commercial construction, development, and design all over the US, Canada, and Latin America. And I have a BA in sustainability from Arizona State University. Alissa, do you want to go next?
Yeah, hi, I'm Alissa Feucht. I'm a senior sustainability strategist with Glumac. So buildings certifications are really the bread and butter of what I do day to day, helping owners really select the correct certification for their buildings and working with the project teams to help make sure those different certifications are achieved, as well as just coming up with different sustainability standards, goals for owners and operators. Really excited to be here. I'll pass it over to Katrina.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katrina Morgan with O'Brien 360, associate principal here. I'm a recovering architect with 25 years in the industry at this point. I just realized this morning that my first lead project was a version 1 missile storage warehouse. So we've come a long way since then. And I would say that I've enjoyed the rating system and green building world growing along with me over these last 25 years. So Alissa and I have been in the trenches with this stuff for a long time, not to make 2 military references in 1 minute. But now we focus on, in that time, the evolution, I would say, has gone from just trying to figure out what green building means to now we're focusing more on occupancy phase and wellness and carbon emissions and really regenerating through design. So looking forward to talking with you all today.
And I'm Elyse Hobson. I'm the Senior Product Manager from UL Solutions. I am primarily on the development side of a lot of these programs that many of you utilize. Most of my experience is in the built environment for about 15 years. My degree is in computer engineering. And so most of my background and experience is in IoT, building systems, building products and solutions. It's nice to meet everyone. Last but not least,
thanks, Elyse. I'm Melanie Danuser, and I serve as a Director of Education and Training for the Smart Building Center, the host of Smart Buildings Exchange, and the Northwest Energy Efficiency Council, or NEEC for short. I've been with the organizations for my 12th year, and in my role, I manage the education and training program, develop the strategy on how our education and training programs can drive our missions forward. Included in my work is managing the Building Operator Certification Program, which is kind of our flagship education program, which trains building operators and maintenance staff on how to optimally make sure their buildings are performing. So happy to be here today.
Thank you, ladies, for those introductions. I just wanted to let the audience know that you may ask questions throughout the session by using the Q&A dialog box, and we will try to answer those as we go along and again at the end of our presentation. Alissa, if you could go ahead and get us started today.
My screen up. All right. Yeah, happy to be here today. basically, I'm going to give a quick 101 of different sustainability certifications that are out there, and sustainability and health and wellness certifications. And so condensing presentation into probably an hour-long presentation into 10 minutes. So wish me luck. So why rating systems? Rating systems really help focus project teams in on what matters. And so helping by choosing a certification throughout your design process, you can really dial in those goals and figure out what matters. Certifications also provide third-party review and credibility, which is extremely important. So making sure that your design is incorporating all of those great metrics into it. And also very, very important is driving market transformation. So moving from a building that is code to a building that is more efficient, and ideally a building that is going to be regenerative would be the goal. Different certifications that are out there. Elyse is going to talk about the SPIRE certification a little bit later, but I'm going to be really focused in on those sustainability and health and wellness certifications. So we have Fit Well, Lead Well, and the Living Building Challenge that I'm going to touch base on. For all of these buildings, for all these certifications, you really want to think about this in an integrative design process. So through that conceptual and schematic design phase of a project, that's really when you want to explore all of the options and what works best for your building. One size doesn't fit all with these certifications. So this is really one when you want to establish goals for your project, figure out what's important to you as an owner and to the occupants that are going to be moving into the spaces. Through the documentation phase, so when you're going in design development and construction documentation, that's really when you want to make sure these goals are becoming an actuality and that all of the credits that you've decided to pursue under each of these certifications is getting implemented into your drawing set. Finally, moving into the verification process. So for some of these certifications, you get your verification with your construction document set. Sometimes it happens after the construction of the building is complete. And even for some of these certifications, you're going to have a 1-year post-occupancy phase in which you have proven performance of how your building is operating. The first certification I'm going to touch base on is the LEED certification. This is one that most everybody is probably the most familiar with. And so this is a certification for buildings, and it's very focused on the efficiencies of your building. So trying to make sure that you have better water efficiency, that you are thinking about the energy efficiencies of your spaces. But also there are parts that are about the occupants going into your spaces. So about creating those indoor healthy environments through the indoor environmental quality category. So creating spaces that have good views, good daylighting, incorporating that all into the building. LEED buildings are certified. They stem from just LEED certified up to the gold standard being platinum, like the best LEED building out there is the platinum building. And so for LEED buildings, there is not a post-occupancy evaluation phase. These are really, you get your certification through your documentation. So through your construction documentation and the LEED documentation that you submit, which is narratives and some forms that you're filling out, that is how you prove your performance. A couple of strategies in action here are your indoor water use reduction. So showing water savings over a baseline, energy efficiencies, things like bike rooms, making sure that you're on bike paths. So the location of your building comes into play here. And also your construction and demolition waste management practices. So really dialing in how your building is constructed, thinking about what can be recycled, reused, and things like that. The next certification I'm going to jump into is the Living Building Challenge. And so rather than creating a more efficient building under LEED, this is about really creating a regenerative building. So a building that has the water life cycle all within it, where you're utilizing your rainwater, your gray water to meet your flushing demands, where you have black water treatment within your building, where you're generating all of the energy that your building needs throughout the year. Another somewhat challenging portion of this is the materials pedal. This is where you are making sure that all of the materials being installed with your building are very healthy. They don't have chemicals that are on the red list, so chemicals that would be unhealthy for the occupants of your spaces. And I think one of the most fun portions of this is the beauty pedal. And so incorporating beauty into your building, making sure that you're incorporating biophilia into your spaces. So thinking about bringing the outdoors inside, how can you make those environments really nice for the occupants within the space, really creating those beautiful environments as well as ones that are regenerative. For Living Building Challenge projects, in order to get certified, you do have a proven performance period. There's a 1-year post-occupancy phase with Living Building Challenge projects in which you have to prove the performance of your buildings. So prove that you are generating all of the energy that your building needs. Prove that your water cycle is, that you're not having to use any of the city's potable water and you're able to create that yourself. And so through that 1-year post-occupancy phase, after that, you can finally achieve your full Living Building Challenge certification. There are lighter ways to achieve this. There's pedal certification pathways as well, but full Living Building Challenge is really about creating that regenerative building that is doing more for the environment and not just less bad. Now I'm moving over to the health and wellness side of certifications. The first one I wanted to touch base on is the WELL certification. And so this is a human health focused rating system. So moving away from how you're building, like the efficiencies of your building, you're now thinking about how great of spaces you're creating for the occupants that are going to be within your building. There are healthy building concepts within WELL. Within WELL, there are preconditions that you have to meet in order to get WELL certification. There are within LEED also prerequisites that you have to meet for those certifications. So you're not able to achieve certification without meeting these preconditions under WELL. And as you can see, all of these categories are really about creating those healthy environments. So making sure you have good air and water quality, that there's healthy food options for the occupants within your spaces, good daylighting. And also a really important portion is the movement and the mind categories. So creating spaces that the occupants are able to be active within. So thinking about having really great amenities for all the occupants within the building, where they can go to a gym, they can go to a meditation room if they need some time to relax. There's mother's rooms, things like that. So making sure that these buildings really have all those amenities that are going to make those occupants happy. With WELL certification, there is a performance verification portion of it where you are doing like your air quality testing, your water quality testing. So there is that testing portion in order to get the certification. WELL certification levels go from bronze to platinum, platinum being the highest rating here. And then finally, we're going to touch really briefly on the Fitwell certification. So Fitwell certification, I consider it kind of WELL light because there's not the prerequisites or preconditions required for this certification. You get to select which credits your building is going to pursue. This is still a certification that's very much focused in and dialed in on the health and wellness of the occupants. So really creating those healthy spaces for everybody. There's these different health impact categories within it. And it's about, again, providing healthy food options, promoting occupant safety, promoting movement of the occupants. So there's a lot to do with stairwells, creating these nice stairwells that people actually want to utilize and not these dark stairwells that are just fire escapes. So trying to promote the movement of the occupants within this space. Fitwell certification levels go from 1-star to 3-star certification. And so a little bit different, but 3 stars being your highest achieving certification under this one. And finally, to kind of summarize it all up, because some building owners have decided that one certification is not their pathway anymore, and they're trying to combine different certifications, these certifications have created these pathways, like these crosswalks between them. So if you decided to pursue, say, a LEED and Fitwell certification at the same time, by achieving certain LEED credits, you automatically achieve those under the Fitwel certification. So kind of trying to ease that burden of achieving your certifications. There are those crosswalks available for all of these different certification pathways. I am going to go ahead and pass the torch over to Katrina after that really quick overview. But if there are any questions, again, put them into the Q&A box and we will try to get to them during our discussions earlier or later. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Alyssa, for giving us kind of an overview of the different programs. Katrina, if you don't mind, if you could just talk a little bit more about kind of how do we go about finding the right solutions for the right place, the project, and different approaches on holistic thinking and customer experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I get the screen back?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's see if, am I sharing yet?
Yes.
Okay. Stand by while I get this set up properly. I've got parts of the Zoom directions in front of my instructions. So let's go like, that should be showing it now, right?
Yes.
Good?
You're good.
Okay. Yeah, thanks so much, Alyssa. That was incredibly succinct, very quick, good overview of all of these rating systems. It gets quite complicated once you look at all of them together, doesn't it? It's so we are often tasked with helping our clients find the right solution, right sizing it, and taking a holistic view of where to focus and where to avoid wild goose chases. We often get the phone call that says, get us LEED Silver stat. They might be halfway through design versus tell us what approach offers the most benefit and the best value. So one takeaway I'd like for this audience to hear today is please come to us early and often, and please come with a more open question. I think it will help you and help us to, steer you in a direction that you'll probably get a lot more out of, and you might end up spending fewer pennies. Considering why you would pursue any particular rating system, Alyssa mentioned the top, 5 to 10 of them. There are dozens literally out there. So there are a lot of options and the industry doesn't know about all of them. So let us help you to figure out why this would fit versus another. For example, why are you saving energy? Are you trying to reduce your carbon impact? Are you trying to save operational dollars? Because those answers are different. The technical solutions are different. So give us the opportunity to help you tailor what system helps to drive the solutions. Design-based certification versus third parties. So Alyssa mentioned how LEED is focused on, I call it promises. You're writing down all the promises. You're modeling a performance. You're writing down what you're expecting and hoping for, but nobody comes back to check. But I want to add to that, Alyssa, and you hit on my point entirely, that there is a different program out there that the whole industry doesn't know about. So no one is talking about this. This is LEED 4.1, not LEED 4.0 or earlier, O+M. So on the panel, raise your hand if you've ever had to do anything with O&M. Yeah, you have worked with it. Okay. So this is the LEED sticker you get for the operations phase. So it's the sister to LEED NC or LEED CI, or, and just be aware, audience, that there are more than 25 LEED programs now, so, and again, it's about picking the right fit. And LEED Silver looks the same, the sticker looks the same for a LEED commercial interiors project as it does for a core and shell, as it does for an O&M, as it does for a full building. So all of that is nuance, and it's our job to know it. It's not, everybody's job to try to figure that out every day, but just know that there are a lot of layers in there, and we can help you to zero in on what makes the most sense. But I do want people to take away today that this option is out there, and we've been doing this for new buildings, because when you build a new building, you're building a future existing building, right? So we're applying LEED O+M to new buildings. Once they turn the key, then we launch the performance period and we start tracking performance. And I want to tell you, you're all wasting a lot of money on LEED NC projects. I'm a LEED consultant, so I'm basically shooting myself in the foot here, but you can do this for a lot less money in certain cases. In some cases, there are challenges even achieving LEED prerequisites, especially as the carbon impacts become more prevalent. We can do O+M on a new building project for a lot less money, and I feel like it's providing a lot of value, and it's tracking actual performance. It's significantly easier to document. It's very user-friendly, and it spans time. It actually effectively, more than anything I've seen in my 25 years, it works over time, and it engages people in a pretty effective way, including building operators and occupants. I'm just going to hit a couple of images here, and then so we can get to talking about it. But these two images are just snapshots from the ArcScoru website. That's where LEED O+M is tracked. And this ties all of our conversations together about operations phase, worker training from Melanie, Alyssa's, design input, UL solutions. All of that work fits into this kind of platform. And it's small type, but what I'm showing you here is, this is a very simple platform that anybody can log on to and see the monthly performance trending, the energy performance, water performance, waste, and that's hard, that's landfill waste versus recycling, et cetera. Transportation is tracked, human experience, and then the next one, most important to me right now, is scope 1 and 2 carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions in general. So this is more user-friendly than any of the systems I've seen so far, and all of them plug into this in a pretty integrated way. And nobody knows about it. So that's my message. Know that this is out there, and please reach out and ask about it, because it's underutilized as a system right now. This is commenting on, I won't harp on this much, but Alissa mentioned it too. Is your project more well aligned for well certification or fit well? Get the right scale, figure out what makes the most sense for your budget, for your occupants. Do you need a well performance rating, or could you scale down to a well equity rating, which is a much smaller lift, a well health and safety rating, even smaller lift, et cetera. So, living building challenge, Alissa mentioned, you don't have to do the whole challenge. You can start with one pedal. You could start with just living building challenge, 0 carbon. Things like that. So again, a lot of nuance, a lot of layers, but know that it's not just one size fits all. At this point, we have a very sophisticated array of offerings in the world that we can all employ now. There's also LEED 0 carbon versus LBC living 0 carbon. They function very differently. They're trying to do the same things, but they address different topics. One addresses transportation, one doesn't. So it's all also a part of figuring out what's the right fit and right size for your project. And then again, is it a new construction project or is it an O&M project, which makes the most sense? And then this is just to say you can mix and match. So please do. And then I think in terms of accelerating change in our field, use these accountability tools, things like EC3 for embodied carbon, all of the rating systems we're talking about, use them smartly, and I hate to see people overspend on rating systems for the sake of rating systems. Use those systems to make an excuse to have a great conversation versus just filling out more paperwork, right? And integrate commissioning throughout the whole life cycle of the building and accelerate change by coming at it from all the angles. Like today, we're talking about design and operations and occupants and facilities, people. The only way to crack this nut is to come at it from a bunch of directions, not just, the design direction. We need more a holistic view of everything to really make change. So that's my time.
Thank you for Katrina for giving us kind of that insight on how we go about making the right solutions.
Sure.
Elyse, if you don't mind, could you touch on a little bit on the considerations of degree of difficulty, maybe some cost considerations, return on investments, and then just kind of give us a brief overview of the Aspire program?
Of course. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is actually I'll first start with Aspire, just in that idea of, can you swap the screen? Thank you. Yeah. So when we're talking about choosing the right solution, choosing the right program, one thing that we are starting to see is also the idea of something like our smart systems rating program. So what this is a holistic assessment, and it's developed by UL Solutions in partnership with TIA. And these types of programs, these more smart building focus programs, I would say kind of help solve that pillar problem that we all seem to have when it comes to a lot of these building certificates. This program assesses a smart building based off of 6 different categories. And so you can see here, it's not just about one particular pillar. So what we really look at is the combination of operations, performance, and even building capabilities. And what we do is we provide a rating or 5-star rating based off of the results of that finding. And so UL Solutions is a very well-known, trusted third-party safety science leader. And so our method of assessment is something that we take very seriously. And so when we look at a smart building, we realize that, you know, you can have the most healthy building, but it may actually have other areas and issues. And so we really want to look at it holistically with a much broader, larger lens, especially when you're also trying to figure out really the complicated things like, where do I invest my time? Where do I invest my money? This kind of helps provide a larger window potentially into maybe different areas of focus that you might need. A very high level, a little bit about Spire that's a little bit unique is we actually have 2 different versions of an assessment. So we have a self-assessment, and then of course that verified assessment. A self-assessment, I always kind of like to think of this as a pre-test. So if you have a building and you have some understanding whether or not you're a facility manager or an operator or an owner or a REIT, you have the capability to look at your building as you think it is now and perform that assessment. And that assessment will provide you a score, which gives you an indication of potentially how you may do within the assessment itself, but also might provide some insights into areas of focus that you might have. And then we have the actual verified assessment where an assessor will come on site, and like many of these programs that require documentation, we actually do require what we call physical evidence or proof for visual verification that showcases that for each criteria within the assessment and for each question that we may have, you actually do have to provide answers, whether or not, you know, it's literally walking in through the building. And so it's really giving you a nice comprehensive view into exactly where your program's at. And then finally, of course, like many others, we do have that qualification program where you can become a Spire certified person as well. So this slide, obviously, it says Aspire is appropriate for a range of customers. I mean, of course it is, but also many of these programs are. So it's not just Spire that can fit for a variety of people. If you're a facility manager, if you're an architect, if you're an owner, if you're a portfolio, or even a building developer or a solutions provider, you know, these assessments really help to provide a little bit of a window, a little bit more of a focus, or even a roadmap planning for your building and those needs that you may have. One thing that people always kind of ask me is, you know, how much do these things cost? Many of them, of course, are based off of square footage. Spire program and many others are very similar to that in that nature. But when it comes to that degree of difficulty, we also see that many people are, I would say, almost nervous about, you know, where to start, how long is this going to take me? And so a lot of that really comes down to preparedness for assessments, your documentation, your digitization, and all of those needs. But by creating something like a more holistic assessment, we are helping to try and reduce that degree of difficulty. So for example, with Spire, you know, our findings will kind of showcase maybe one particular pillar that you may need to focus on. And so that might help narrow down your costs, might help you define a budget a little bit better. And maybe then you might go for something like LEED or another type of program. And so we're really trying to, through all of these assessments, create tools that help you figure out kind of currently where your building is at, but also to try and make some of that difficulty a little bit easier. And again, some return on investment. A lot of these programs you'll see help to measure some form of ROI, whether or not it's identifying how you're utilizing your energy, how much occupancy you're taking advantage of, whether or not by implementing a lot of these technologies, you may see improvements in productivity and health. And so I'll stress, though, that a lot of the return on investment is equal to how much time that you invest in these programs as well. And so you'll see more out of it the more you participate in them and the more that you understand the depth and breadth of what they are providing. And also on the other end, when you think about just how these programs continue to thrive, continue to grow, and even from a data collection perspective, it's really important that the people that are within those buildings and those operators understand not only these programs, but have the tools that they need to help guide future projects or future changes and help to keep the buildings up and running. And I believe that's kind of where I'm at with a nice little segue for Melanie here.
Thanks to my fellow panelists, really teed me up for success this morning. And I am here to talk a little bit about the importance of credentials for your workforce after you, or maybe during or before you are pursuing a certification for your building. I have learned a lot from my fellow panelists here about the benefits of these various certifications and the value they convey to investors, owners, managers, tenants, and occupants. But the persistence of the energy savings and the happiness and health of occupants is very dependent on a well-trained staff who know how to communicate and with whom. So a building is an investment, and the spaces inside the buildings are an investment for occupants and tenants alike. So I wanted to share a quick story. Recently, my husband and I were thinking about buying a new car, and I wanted someone to tell me that the investment we were making was a good one. Do we buy used? Do we buy new? And what about forthcoming policy for electric vehicles? And we had all kinds of questions, but just like cars that come with a warranty or a Carfax report, these certifications that my fellow panelists talked about demonstrate a certain amount of verification for buildings as well. And there's no shortage of data for buildings. Like in the city of Seattle, you can look at, let's see here, guys, energy use intensity for any building and how it stacks up against other buildings. The certifications my fellow participants covered are a layer of assurance for investors, owners, occupants, that it's a smart investment, but the building itself is only as good as the people who run it. And I love that my fellow panelists talked about building operators throughout their presentations. So I'm going to talk a little bit about skill development, workforce training, and development. This next slide is just a little graphic that I put together. And I always tell this story because I love it. Somewhere along the way in my career of workforce training and development, an anecdote was shared with me about the hesitance to invest in employee development. A supervisor asked, what if I invest in this person and they leave? And the answer given to them was simply, what if you don't invest in them and they stay? So yesterday, Kamala Harris, our vice president, was in Seattle at our own McKinstry. And I absolutely love that the lead off for that event was an HVAC technician apprentice. She spoke about her journey into the field and the support provided her through training, both on the job and through a program at Bates Technical College, actually in Tacoma, Washington. So I'm sharing that because it was just a really tangible example of when an employee feels like they're invested in, then they're more likely to stay and your building is going to benefit from that. So again, this visual that I'm showing, just like when you're thinking about certifying a building, you should think about training for your staff from the day you hire them or even previous to that. Leaders should be thinking about how they can support that position, how they can support that person, just as you're thinking about your buildings. All right, so let's think about now the importance of training and credentialing for your facility staff. Alissa, Elyse, Katrina, they all covered great questions that you want to think about before you certify a building. So some of the same questions that you want to ask about right-sizing a certification for your building. You want to be thinking about right-sizing a certification for your staff as well. So Facility staff aren't just building operators. You know, these positions take on any number of titles and tiers within your organization: building engineers, facility managers, chief engineers. But some questions to ask when you're thinking about the training and credentialing for your staff is, what is the employee's current role? What are their goals? What are your organization's gaps in knowledge, skills that are missing, you know, future looking 1, 2, 5, 10 years down the road? Is there policy driving credential decisions? What certifications does your building hold already? You know, do you have a LEED O&M certification? Do you have a Fitwell? And how do you want to use your staff to maintain that level of performance? And there might be, depending on the certification, there might be a requirement for ongoing performance. And I'll talk a little bit more about policy as well. And a few years ago, there weren't a lot of tools to tell you, let's start thinking about my facility staff growth and development. But this presentation I'm giving today is a lot different than what I was giving maybe 2 years ago, when, you know, it's like, we need frameworks, we need guidance, and there's a lot of tools available now. The one I'm showing here, it's a quick snapshot, but the Interstate Renewable Energy Council, or IREC for short, put together this Green Buildings Career Map. And I love it because it's interactive and there's a lot of different ways you can explore advancement routes. You can look at, you know, where you're starting, where you want to end up, or where you want your employee to end up. And there's also a section on new collar jobs. And I know we'll talk a lot about that maybe in Q&A, as far as the technology that's driving the different knowledge, skills, and abilities that building professionals will need to have. So I included the link on the slide. If you guys want to explore that a bit, I encourage you to do so. But I mentioned in my introduction also that I get to manage the building operator certification program for the Smart Building Center. I'm showing here just our version of a quick career map. BOC is a training and credentialing program. It was launched here in the Northwest in the late 1990s, and it really trains building operators, building professionals, engineers, whatever their job title might be, to make buildings more comfortable, efficient, and environmentally friendly. It aligns with a lot of the building certifications that were touched on earlier. Our program also helps save operations and energy costs. I'll dig into that a little bit more, but I'm showing this because we ask the same question, like, you know, Katrina mentioned, come talk to us early, right? Come talk to us so we can ask you the same questions. What experience are you or your staff bringing to the table? What is the appropriate entry point? Is BOC even the right fit? You know, we are very fortunate to have great relationships with other associations like BOMA, IFMA, AEE. There's a ton of great credentials out there. And I really encourage you to find your resource, whatever it might be. And one of my favorite parts about my job is talking to people and helping advance their careers, and always happy to talk about that. I'm going to touch briefly on policy because I've kind of woven that into the questions you might want to ask before investing in training and certification for your employees. This is just a database. You know, I'm not a policy wonk, some of my colleagues are, but you can go and check out the database of state incentives for renewables and efficiency. There's all kinds of ways you can filter, but the point I want to make here is there's a lot of policy coming down the pike that affects buildings and their performance, and also woven into a lot of that policy, kind of nested in when you dig in, are requirements for personnel. I know that in Washington State, for the Clean Buildings Performance Standard, there are several different identified positions and different credentials that qualify people for those different positions in your building. So before you invest in certifications, I really encourage you to think about the policy that might be affecting your building and your staff. Okay, so just starting to wrap some stuff up here, the convergence of certifications for people and buildings. We've talked a lot. I feel like I could have just said, whatever my panelists said, apply that to your people, not just your building, right? You want to be thinking about prerequisites, eligibility for your staff and for the training, levels of certification, right? There's, BOC is time consuming. I'm not going to lie, level 1's like 70 some hours of time commitment. So, the question we get is, well, do they really need to go to training for that long? Maybe, maybe not, maybe a shorter kind of boot camp training would be good. Maybe a continuing education webinar, would check a box if you're just trying to get some quick and dirty information about a technology that's being deployed in your building. But just like there's a ton of benefits for certifying your building, whether that's, for occupants, for the investors, there's a lot of benefits to investing in your staff as well. First and foremost, for a lot of folks is money. So if you invest in the right training, you're going to see a return on investment. I talked briefly about energy savings. This is from the BOC program. We have third-party verified energy savings for BOC graduates. So on an annual basis, the average BOC graduate can save around $10,500 in energy costs alone, when you look at the kilowatt hours, the therms, and the reduction in energy demand. So there's that. And then there's also improved employee performance. When you have a well-trained staff, they're going to perform at a higher caliber, and then that's going to translate to your building performing better as well. IFMA, I mentioned the International Facility Managers Association. They've done some really good reports on FMs that are credentialed with an IFMA credential. Some of those key takeaways include that the average IFMA credentialed facilities manager is more than 40%. There's a 40% increase in their performance. And then my last slide here was that there are several examples of how appropriate training prepares a staff to operate and maintain a high-performing building. And I just love this one. There's like I said, there's a ton of case studies out there, but I like this one because it's a little church in Oregon that is earned LEED certification, and the operator there really credited his training to be able to communicate with contractors, get his existing building and some new construction certified. And I mentioned this earlier, but here at Smart Building Center, we really, try to focus on meeting people where they are with training programs, with just moving the industry forward, and that Smart is really accessible to anyone, wherever the building is, wherever the staff is. And that's where I wanted to wrap up with that. So I'm going to pass it back to Christina. Sorry again about my little tech snafu here. We even practiced, but
it was fun to read it.
Yeah, you can see behind the curtain. It's okay.
Transparency is good, right, Melanie?
Exactly.
Yeah, well, thank you, ladies. You've all done a really great job today providing an overview of quite a number of building and workforce rating systems and credentials. I'd really like to dig a little bit more into the question of why. So, Alyssa, if you could start this discussion, why would a building owner pursue a rating? Does it provide a quantifiable return on their investment, or are there other metrics that justify this effort?
Yeah, so I definitely think most certifications provide a return on investment, and that goes beyond just your efficiencies. So yes, you're saving energy if you have a more efficient building, you're saving water if you have better water efficiencies. It goes above and beyond that. Right now, I know across the country, there's a lot of open office spaces, and I see buildings that are pursuing these higher level certifications, such as one that just received its certificate of occupancy here in Seattle for its Living Building Challenge PEDAL certification. Just received its certificate of occupancy. It already had a tenant build out happening within it, like within the next day. And so these buildings that are targeting these higher level certifications have tenants that are excited and want to be moving into these spaces, and it's leaving these other office buildings that aren't pursuing certifications empty a little bit longer. It's that incentive for your tenants to get it occupied quicker. Also, I view it as future proofing. We have things like the Clean Buildings Act that are starting to require buildings to retrofit to meet certain energy use intensities. So a lot of those buildings are going to have to be doing these full-scale retrofits to try to improve their efficiencies. And yes, if you have a new construction building, you're going to already be a pretty efficient building, but at one point, you're going to have to retrofit if you haven't already installed those efficiencies and thought about that from the get-go. And so I will leave it open to some other people to add on, but yes, I think there's a huge return on investment for all these
that's great. I mean, before we jump into, we talked about this a little bit when all of us got together the other day about, LEED's been around for a long time, and with it being part of USGBC, we know there's some quantifiable, realistic incentives for building owners to go that route with the LEED certification, with tax incentives, maybe some FAR incentives and the like. So how do these other programs compete with that? So I guess my question is more around, obviously future proofing, right? How do we demonstrate ROI? We're talking about health and well-being and all of that. So outside of the upfront money incentive for building owners to jump on that bandwagon with the LEED certification, how do we demonstrate the ROI in different levels for the different programs? And I'll leave that open to the rest of the panel to kind of weigh in on that.
I'm happy to talk a little bit about the health and wellness ones.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, health and wellness, I think, are the most obvious and the most tangible. Even just from an occupant experience, how many of us have gone to work or have once worked for an office that was basically in the doldrums, maybe hadn't been updated since the building was developed, or even worse. And so, back to that idea of bringing people back into the office, really making sure that they're enjoying those spaces. So it's less of maybe a measurable one, but in terms of tenants, right? You get tenants versus you don't have them. It's really something that it's about bringing people back into the office, back into spaces that they feel healthy in, feel comfortable in, but also helps them continue to stay motivated. And
yeah, I like that, Elyse. And I'll just add that, I talked about training operators and maintenance staff, but also engaging your occupants is important. You have this, you earn this building certification, maybe you have the perfect building, right? Like with a certification and a well-trained staff, but engaging your occupants, and occupants are hungry for that. They want to feel involved in their space. They want to feel like they're making a difference, that they're contributing. So I think occupant education, is also an important part of operating these high performance, desirable buildings, because once you've gotten them there and the tenants are there, I think engaging them to maintain and improve, whether it's energy or waste reduction or the beauty of the building, those are really important, strategies to employ with the occupants.
Yeah, so there's obviously like market drivers and stakeholder drivers that are kind of helping us decide what makes the most sense for each of these, not so much just the upfront tax incentive ROI that we're seeing from some of those older programs. So Katrina, it seems to be trade-offs between pursuing ratings that are self-certifying versus a third-party validation versus just declaring consistency with the particular rating system's requirement. So can you help us understand some of the advantages and disadvantages of these different approaches?
Yes, if you can confirm that you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
You might have seen me move from one location to another. I had a little.
Oh, okay. No, we still got you.
Yep, good. Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm biased because at this point, in the last handful of years, I have basically converted, and I'm basically an evangelist for really only going for field verified, occupancy phase certification systems. I'm not very interested anymore in, just the promises and just the modeling. That's super important. I don't want to downplay that. It's very important you can't get to a high performing building without doing a lot of study in the process of creating it, an integrative design, et cetera. But I would like to do that and then always verify. And there was a question on the Q&A side about, which rating systems do require verification. It's a great question, and I need help from the panelists, but I know, again, Lido plus M does. Bias, how do we call it? The passive house is a great example. I can think of projects where I would, if I were the decision maker, I would say, you already have a very strict energy code, meet the energy code and then do FIAS so that you can have the blower door testing benefit, and the field verification of the contractor's work, So yeah, I think that it couldn't be more important to have that field verification side. And Melanie, what you were saying about the effect, the actual outcome of the human beings knowing how to operate the building and having that training, it cannot be overstated. I think you said 40% difference, and some people might go, really, Melanie? And I'm here to say, absolutely, Melanie, because that person, if every project of any scale had a resource conservation manager, we could reduce our carbon impact by a whole lot, right? It's not the rating system that does that. It's the human beings that do that. So that I do think that the operations phase verification paired with human beings learning and growing with these buildings and with the technologies is where it's at.
Yeah, 100%. Katrina.
Here's my soapbox.
I've got a question now for Elyse. I was really interested to hear about your about UL's recent work in this area. So can you tell us a little bit more about why UL decided to develop Spire? Excuse me.
Yeah,
and a bit more about your assessment tools.
Yeah, so UL, obviously, many of you are aware, are, as like I said, the safety science leader. So most of our background is, of course, in ensuring that the products that we use in our day-to-day life are safe and meet certain standards and processes. So speaking of, verification, certification, Spire, of course, is one of those that requires, for their verified assessment, we do require actually having to be on field and looking at that stuff through our marketing plan verification. So, but primarily it's just a natural fit for somebody like UL. We are always looking for how we can not only service our customers, but service the people in the spaces that they occupy. We partnered, like I said before, with TIA, and we developed then a smart building sort of summit or committee, which helped actually define a lot of that Spire criteria. And so we're really trying to focus on, that next stage. We've worked on assessing, ensuring that sprinkler systems work. Now let's look at the building and how we're going to continue to add more value. And so it's really to help fulfill that space. And of course, as a trusted third-party assessor and the types of organization that UL is, it just was a natural fit. Because a lot of that programs you'll see, and a lot of times that people have issues with programs is, somebody on site that is doing the assessment or going for that certification might have a certain stake in the claim for reaching that certain level. And UL, we are not a building solutions provider. So we really take our third-party approach very seriously in our methodologies.
Excellent. Thank you, Elyse. And then now I'm going to turn it over to Melanie. Melanie, you've brought a slightly different element to the discussion today with your focus on workforce credentials. So clearly, as building systems become more complex and operations trend towards automation and self-healing, there are unprecedented challenges to building operations staff. So can you give us your thoughts on the state of workforce skills development today and whether you see a role for a more highly skilled operations staff in achieving some of these performance-based rating systems?
Yeah, good question. I think I've answered if I do see a role for a well-trained operations staff. Absolutely. And I think it's key the same as you look at a building's ongoing performance, that you look at the continued training needs of your staff, because there's going to be new systems deployed. There's going to be a whole shift in roles and responsibilities. I think the question, talked about some automation systems, some self-healing. So that doesn't mean that the building operators are going to be automated out of a job, but it does mean that the jobs that they're being asked to do, the day-to-day tasks and their responsibilities, are changing. So we've done that. We've run a job task analysis and, surveyed thousands of building operators as far as how they spend their time, what the emphasis is on, this variety of tasks, including building automation systems, how it's changing what they do. So absolutely, I think it's only going to get more important. And I did see a question, I think, in the chat as well, as far as, vendors, and when you get new systems. I don't have it pulled up right in front of me, but I think the key is communication. Now the IT and there's a lot of talk about the convergence between IT and OT and integrating those teams, and also integrating the operations team early on in the procurement process before a system is deployed, that the team either doesn't know how to operate, doesn't want to operate, maybe they know something that, it's going to conflict. So I think that those, LEAD talks about having charrettes, but having all of the different parties at the table before either procuring a new system, deploying a new system, is very important, and including the operations team. And then the ongoing education, even if you have earned a credential, looking at that each year, whether or not it, requires you to actually maintain it to continue it, but to look at continuing education, what you need, what your vendors might provide, what you and your organization need to go outside to get training on.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, that training piece. Just if we think about how long building systems are within a building, and even just with the shifting of age in the workforce, there's going to be a huge gap. And we all kind of know that that's going to be happening and is coming down the pipeline. And so ensuring that future operators not only understand and have that knowledge from those that are experienced that come before them, but also in how to use a lot of these tools, these certification programs, and really understand how to improve their building performance is really going to be critical.
Agreed.
Yeah, really, really great discussion. Very insightful, ladies. I appreciate, again, you all being here today. Before we end today's discussion, because I think we're coming close on our time, and I want to leave some time for some Q&A that we had in the chat. I have one more question about if the panel could just take a little bit of time and talk about durability. So, once a building achieves these particular ratings, how does it ensure ongoing performance that's consistent with that standard? So how can owners prevent kind of a sort of a one and done psychology to their building rating systems? Maybe Alissa, you can start, and then others can kind of jump in and give some thoughts.
Yeah, so I really view just like rating systems as helping set your building up for success. And so, as Melanie said, during those early workshops, making sure the building operators are in the room, telling us what they like or dislike about certain equipment, as you're building it for the operators, making sure building users are in the room, making sure that we're creating spaces that are going to work for the intent of that building. That rating system should be driving the success. From there, really important to me in any of these rating systems is helping set up metrics for tracking. And so like the metering portion of it, building management systems, building automation systems, whatever you want to call them, making sure you're setting up that building to be properly tracked throughout its lifetime, so the operators can be dialed in on how that building is operating throughout its entire lifetime. If you choose to go for a LEED O&M certification, that tracking's already happening through that. And so it's really easy to even see how you compare to a LEED O&M certification through that ongoing tracking portion. And also through that, the more educated those building, like the people within the building are, the building operators are, they're going to be able to spot when things are operating incorrectly and really dial in and fix it quickly to ensure that you're getting the efficiencies that were designed and intended into your building, that it's actually working and operating how it was intended. And so I think just, yeah, all of that education and bringing people in early on, make sure it's not just one and done. You're thinking about that full life cycle of the building from the get-go.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, here at Schneider, especially in my role as a consultant, one of the things that I like to do with our consultants is we kind of start at what is the end outcome, and then how do we work backwards from that to make sure that we have all the folks at the table to make the decision, so that we're getting, it's not an afterthought, right? We start at the end. What do we want to achieve, and what are the steps that we need to get there? And in that process, we can determine again what makes the most sense to get to reach those goals. I love that. Did anybody else have anything else that they wanted to add on discussion of durability? Katrina?
Yeah, just that I think our design world, I want to encourage, you know, these in these conferences, those are the times when we can live in Barbie dreamland, right? And so let's do that, you know. And
We'll
one of
go
the
with the Barbie
reasons,
theme, Katrina.
yeah, exactly. I guess, you know, I used to
Why
always say
not?
that, and now it's relevant.
Right.
But you know, we can do a better job as the design industry in engaging people, you know, and there are many great reasons that people don't want to show up at a 7-hour meeting to talk about something that's relevant to them for a few seconds during that whole session, right? And you know, there are some tools of the trade that are underutilized right now, but again, in Barbie Dream World, you know, there is a tool called the OPR, the Owner's Project Requirements, and Alyssa's shaking her head yes, because you know, we've been to this movie together before, and that is a tool of the commissioning industry that is completely underutilized, and it's not usually managed well. So a well-managed OPR process is where you start before you even pick a site, and you are constantly iterating on what the owner needs and what the occupants need in a very systematic and detailed way. Because talking about what people need in a workshop setting doesn't necessarily translate to physical design, doesn't translate to the users or the operators. So being systematic about it, and we have all these incredibly sophisticated tools at our fingertips now, cloud-based tools. You know, if we're doing a better job of humans facilitating conversations and software tracking conversations over many years sometimes, and then, you know, doing a better job of commissioning. So commissioning, I keep mentioning, that is part of the answer, is well-managed commissioning from really day one all the way through way past occupancy, right? So know that commissioning is a resource. It is meant to be used early on. LEED created that, right? Commissioning always existed for decades, but bringing in commissioning agents early on, because they're basically magicians, you know, give them a chance to tell us what they're going to see in the future, because they can do that in a way that most of us can't, right? So use that tool, you know, I think that helps. And we have another 20 minutes, I think.
Yeah, we do.
Okay, good.
We have quite a few questions. I saw that we've had some answered already. So thank you, ladies, for jumping in and answering those as they came through. So if that's okay, if there's no other closing remarks from the team here, I'm gonna jump into some of those QAs now, if that's okay.
Sounds great.
So one of the questions that we had was, what about the building intelligence quotient, originally developed for CABA and now updated at buildingiq.com? Is it similar to Spire and Smart Score to give choice?
Yeah, so I think
have a response to that?
Yeah, so what we're trying to do for this sort of presentation is, of course, you can't list every single building certification program that exists.
Right.
So there are tons that are out there. I think even Alyssa tried to narrow down with a few, just in terms of one particular topic. There's so many, and whichever one is best for you and your building is going to be the appropriate one. But there's many to choose from. They each have their own different benefits, their own different areas of focus, but we're all in the same building space that we all want buildings to be better.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like I think I mentioned this on an earlier question in the chat. You know, today's presentation was more about kind of understanding the different programs. What are some different considerations that we can take when deciding which one makes sense for a project? So if there's anyone here in the audience, I think
Yeah.
one of us are more than happy to meet with you individually offline if there's a particular program that you want to dive into to see if that is in alignment with your individual project goals. So
I will say that one is one that I haven't interacted with. And we get this call quite a bit where sometimes it's from a funding source for a project, and they say, oh, somebody told me about this rating system. And a lot of our job can be evaluating the relevance of that. And sometimes there are lots of, I don't know, I'm not saying that one is a scam, but there are lots of, people are trying to make money on, getting you to pay certification fees. Some of them are very useful or legit. And I don't know if that one is, because I've never even heard of it. But the point that I've never heard of it is a little conspicuous to me. So,
or Kava.
I don't know either one. I haven't heard about that. So it sounds like it may be something that is just not in my purview. It's an occupancy phase tool. Maybe it's awesome.
Kava is actually more of an organization around the conversations of like smart building technology, IAQ, that sort of thing.
Okay.
So it's more of like a large council of professionals in the industry to just kind of do some research and some white papers of what are best practices. And so in that, I think there are some discussions on the different programs, and so that's probably like we had talked about earlier in the discussion about we saw some discrepancies with some of the programs. So if you're trying to achieve multiple certifications with LEED and WELL in the past, one would kind of cancel out the other based on the criteria needed. And those organizations are seeing that now, right? So they've recognized it, and they're creating the crosswalk so that we can have the synergies, because sometimes it's not a one size fits all. Sometimes, again, depending on the stakeholders and the goals of the building or the project or whoever else is involved, it might require that we have multiple certifications. I think I gave the example last week about, in New York City, you might see 5 or 6 plaques on the exterior of a building, and that all had different people, weighing into what was important for that project based on their investment, right?
Yep.
So I think it's a great question, but something I think one of us can take offline for that. So moving on, another question I think is, again, more specific to certification program. It was, which rating systems or certifications in addition to LEED 4.1 and O&M and Living Building Challenge require verification of energy performance?
2 others that I know would be LEED Zero Carbon and LEED Zero Energy. LEED Zero Carbon, basically, you're having to offset all of your energy on site, all of your transportation emissions as well. And so you're going to need to show that you're doing that. And then LEED Zero Energy is just focused on the energy emissions. And so those 2, and then probably Living Building Challenge, they also have 0 programs. So those would be that energy performance verification portion.
And in Washington, any project that's over 250,000 square feet is subject to the Clean Buildings Act as well. So it's not a rating system, but it's a responsibility. So that's an area where we're going to start to see more data. But those are big buildings. That's missing a lot of the building.
I think you're bringing up Seattle, and then kind of jumping into different outside influences on why we're making these decisions. We touched on this as a group last week about, depending on geography where you're at, right? Each part of the country has different needs for just the systems involved in the building. Like the heating systems you put into a building in New York City, for example, it's very different than where I'm at. For Miami, we don't require those types of things. And so understanding that, understanding maybe some political influence or some government mandates or incentive programs or the like, that's also one of those other determining factors when deciding which program makes sense for the project.
Yeah, and I think, Christina, that's a good point. You know, I touched on the incentive programs, but reaching out to your utility is also another great resource. They're big supporters sometimes of various training programs, incentive programs for whether it be, policy compliance. It used to be light bulbs, but they, depending on where you are, your utility is also a great resource that can help you on your journey to whether it's a building certification, policy compliance, getting your staff trained. It's all in their best interest. So that's just another, good resource, I think, that is forgotten sometimes.
Yes, exactly. One of our other questions that came in is, how will the smart building systems contribute to the ESG reporting and decarbonization objectives? And I think when we're talking about ESG, there's many components, right? Each one of those, the E, the S, and G, they have different criteria, right? So then understanding maybe where an organization is at, where they think they're doing well, maybe where they have some gaps that they need support. My take would be that we need to understand that first before we can make recommendations on programs, but I'll open up to the panel on giving some advice on how we would address some of those.
Yeah, so smart building systems is my big background. So I thoroughly believe, of course, that those systems and products that are inside of a building, or your building, is only as smart as the things inside of it and how you use it. And so those systems are going to be the foundation that provides the information necessary for reports to make sure that you are achieving those actual objectives. And so without those systems, of course, your job then becomes much harder to try and find ways to report on this information, to gather the information that you need. But so many smart building systems have those capabilities, and even those internal reporting tools, they report on KPIs themselves, as long as you input a little bit of information based off of even maybe your utility. They're really going to be your foundation for the future. And so when you're looking for new projects, new programs, new certifications, making sure that the systems that you have align not only with helping to achieve those goals, but to help achieve other goals that you may have, it's going to be really important. And then, so even from the findings, let's say you've got your LEED certification score and it comes out and it's pretty low and it's not what you were anticipating. Those investments in certain building systems may actually help you then when it comes time for re-verification or recertification, to really actually create that story of, here's where we were after we add these new systems in. This is how much of a benefit we got out of it. I could go on and on about smart systems, so I'll let the rest of you continue.
Did anyone else have any thoughts to add on to that, or?
Can you repeat the question? Because I think, were they talking about just to repeat the question, because I'm curious if it's about the technology or.
How will the smart building systems contribute to the ESG reporting and the decarbonization objectives?
Yeah.
It's the building technology itself.
Yeah, especially for the greenhouse gas emissions. That's where it's much more tangible and direct, and you can count kilograms. ESG is a lot harder to quantify. And I would say that the smart building systems aren't necessarily going to help with ESG that much. That's going to remain a human aspect. But counting kilograms, absolutely, we can do that with building smart building systems. Does that answer
That's exactly what I was going to say. Like we can really support on the decarbonization objectives.
Yeah.
But the ESG is a bit broader.
Yeah, and if we can save time figuring out the greenhouse gas emissions with better tracking, then great. We can spend our time, because that's how it works, right? when we gain time in some other category, we get to spend it on something else. So
right.
Yeah.
Maybe a topic for a future smart building exchange
discussion
on ESG solutions.
Indeed.
So I've got another question in the chat from Melanie. So as buildings likely become more sophisticated, in order to be more efficient, more energy efficient and grid flexible. It seems more direct support from equipment and system suppliers will become necessary. Do you have any thoughts about how this could or should be embedded into the procurement process to ensure long-term support will be provided?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I welcome others to contribute here from the vendor and procurement side. But I touched on this just a bit earlier with the with bringing everyone to the table and training and having some good communication prior to investment in systems and technology, and then ensuring that you're utilizing contractors that understand all of the variety of options. Katrina touched on this, then this is very old term of greenwashing, or, and there's also a lot of energy around contractor training right now and how we can start to educate contractors and vendors on the new technology so that they're actually bringing, good information and to the building owners and managers. So when they're having those conversations. So I wanted to touch on that, and then also succession planning. So Elyse mentioned the gap in the incoming workforce. There is a lot of individuals aging out of this workforce and also transitioning, right? Like maybe they have gotten that taste of IT and they're moving into a different job, but that succession planning is really important to the question that was just asked as far as, and it disappeared from me, but as far as the vendor communications, ensuring that there is that passing of institutional knowledge for existing systems and then plans for new systems that might be deployed in a building. So I think I answered that question, but other panelists might have some good contributions as well.
Yeah, so as far as the procurement process goes, I mean, it's sort of twofold. One side is definitely on the vendor. You're going to want to make sure that you have enough foundational training materials, learning tools, guidelines, help, tutorials, however it is, in order to ensure that people actually know how to use your product correctly. And then also the ability for a facility manager to pick something up. But on the flip side, in terms of procurement, I would say that folks really need to start kind of talking together, especially when we talk about integrating like smarter systems. Then you've got like IT and procurement and then facilities managers all talking the same yet different language. So it's really important for facilities managers to also then be talking in step with the procurement process so they understand what is available to them so that you can choose the right products to fit your needs. Obviously, most people, they tend to have the budget and it's going through that procurement process, and that procurement person may or may not, they have all the foundational knowledge that they need. And that's where, those manufacturers are going to maybe need to supplement to ensure that people understand what they're getting. But folks, I'd say, of course, just need to continue to talk to each other, and it will become more necessary just naturally for procurement to understand that there's new technology coming and it's important to their building. And you can always make it part of a checklist, right? So, usually you have to meet certain standards, and part of it could be this manufacturer is telling me exactly how to use this stuff, and have that as your checkbox procurement process.
Thank you, ladies. I'm just looking to make sure if we have any other questions in the chat. This one's not really a question, it's more of a comment. I don't know if any of you ladies can chat on that just briefly. It's not something I'm familiar with, but the comment was passive house also has an existing building requirement and certification. So I'm not sure what they would like us to discuss more on, but are any of you familiar with that program that can speak to it maybe just briefly?
Our team works on passive house projects, but we haven't seen an existing building go through that exercise yet. So curious to see how that goes, but I like the idea of seeing that applied to existing buildings, because upgrading an existing building envelope is one of the wisest choices you can make and best payback for the investment. But then how do you confirm it? How do you verify it? And so I think the rigor that FIAS would bring, Passive House would bring to the table is very relevant for existing buildings.
Thank you, Katrina. Currently, I'm not seeing any more questions in our chat. So we have about 6 minutes left of our discussion today. So I'm going to give it another minute to see if any other questions come in. But if not, I want to thank all of you ladies for taking the time today to meet with us and provide some really insightful information. This is a big topic. Like we said, there's a lot of different certification programs, and it can be really confusing trying to figure out which one makes sense for a variety of reasons. So hopefully today we've provided a little bit of insight and clarification. And as I've mentioned a few times throughout the presentation, I think every one of us is open and available and willing to dive deeper into any of the different certification programs if anybody that has further questions. So I've not seen anything else come through. So if you ladies are okay, then we'll go ahead and wrap up our session for today.
I actually might throw out a question since we have the resource of this time.
Oh, we got another one too. So
Okay.
you go ahead, Katrina, and then we'll get the next question that just popped in the chat.
Okay. I liked the question someone asked about, is there a tool that says this costs more and this costs less in terms of rating systems? And basically my response always is, it depends, right? And, in very general terms, we can tell you, the answer is no. There is no good resource that is very comprehensive and that's going to give you the answer you need for your project. But, there are basic macro comparisons we can make, but there's so many variables and there's so much nuance that anybody that's looking for that kind of answer of, how does the cost flesh out? It really is worth an investment in looking at that in more detail, and having somebody do that study for them, and not, it's not going to be good information to try to flatten it too much. So does anybody else have any feedback on that?
No, I think you're right. And it's a very complex environment. And
Yeah.
the closest we can get is, most people are charging per square footage of a building.
Yeah, right.
What you're going to get. So
yeah.
it's a mixed bag, and it also depends on the type of assessment you're doing as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. I muted myself. So we have one last question. Do you have advice about how to even get an organization to consider certification, such as municipality? We've talked a little bit about kind of price, and we've talked about workforce engagement. We've talked about some of these programs being very paper intensive, documentation intensive, and all of that. So I think it's a great question if any of you want to chime in on how we're having those conversations.
Yeah, the easiest way to get it across is honestly to codify it, or to have code give incentives to build to a certain standard. As you probably noticed, a lot of us are Washington-based, Seattle-based. We have really good incentives here for building owners to go after the larger certifications, such as Living Building Challenge Pedal certification, by increasing their FAR bonuses and things like that. So if you know code officials, I highly encourage talking to them, because that really does drive the change that we all need to see. Having conversations with the city of Bellevue next week to try to get some more incentives for building owners. And so that's something everybody in our industry should definitely be looking towards. How can we update those building codes and really provide incentives to pursue these higher certifications?
Yeah,
and if the call is coming from inside the house too, that,
right.
Karen, I think your question is coming from inside the house. So you're trying to help your organization to move forward. And that's a different question than how do you change it from the outside? So chip away at it a little bit at a time and keep doing what you're doing and keeping that voice. But I didn't mean to interrupt you, Elyse, but that's,
you're fine.
It's different from the inside versus the outside.
Yeah, I'm not in the Washington area. I'm the glorious Midwest over here. But in order to affect change, of course, from the inside, it's a little bit more difficult. But if there are organizations that are very similar to yours that you can then say, hey, look, here's what they're doing. You know, a lot of people like to, if you got a competitor, you know, maybe you want to dig into what they're doing, and it usually will change the tale a little bit on that end. But at regional requirements, otherwise, if you can tie it to a certain incentive or goal, even for that organization, and say, hey, look, if we go for this certification, that's really going to align with our value system and our goals and what we want, even let's say for the occupants, that's usually also a really good story to help drive that change as well.
Yeah, I think we touched on this again last week when we were talking. Like we've all worked on projects, even though you might be based in the Pacific Northwest or the Midwest, or myself, like in Miami. You know, we have very different things that are contributing to, you know, policies and change and all of that. So how do we, you know, we all understand the importance of this from multiple angles. And so just understanding your audience and what's going to resonate with them. Like, you know, I think I made the joke that I came from Seattle, where sustainability has been part of the conversation for, you know, when I just started in my career in commercial real estate and development. And then I moved last year to South Florida. And it's just a very different message. They have different priorities and different things resonate. So just understanding that persona in the different conversations and the group of stakeholders. So, but yeah, well, I don't see any other questions in today. So we're right at time. I think we're actually a minute over. So I just want to give a big thanks to all of you ladies for being here today and just sharing all of your knowledge and your expertise and giving some advice to our design community on how we can kind of move this forward. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yep. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.